Hello and welcome to the 17th edition of Exploring Enterprise, the podcast series from the Enterprise Research Centre. I'm Professor Mark Hart, I'm Deputy Director at the ERC, and today I'm joined by two great experts on the business support topic which we're going to be exploring. Richard Jeffery, National Director of GC Business based in Manchester, and Jane Galsworthy, Managing Director of Oxford Innovation Advice, and also she's the Chair of the ERC's steering group. Now, the theme of today's session is a big question for all of us at the moment in terms of business support. What is its future? I think we're pretty familiar with its past, but I think we need to be looking at what on earth can we do with regard to business support, especially in England, as we lead into a general election in 2024. We're 12 months away, and I know that political parties are thinking about their manifestos. They are engaging with the topic of business support. Or are they? And that's really what I want to explore with Jane and Richard today. So Jane, I'm going to come to you first. You've been in this game for many, many decades. I'm not sure you appreciate me saying that. And I know from some of your posts on social media and presentations at conferences that you're very vocal about what the current landscape looks like and indeed what needs to be fixed. So I'm going to ask you in the first instance on what are the key issues that government and indeed all the political parties at the national and regional level need to be focusing on.
Thanks, Mark. I guess the first thing to say is that small businesses are a really, really important part of the economy. You know, they employ over half of the private sector people, and they generate over half of the GDP in the country. So they're just a really important part of the economy. And it's a really difficult time for SMEs at the moment. There's been lots of shocks to the system. There's been quite a lot of instability and uncertainty. They're dealing with inflation and trying to manage a lot of risk. So they're a really important part of the economy. We need them to do well, and so they do need support to be able to do that. I mean, I think over over recent years, the sort of key issues have been that there's been no real strategy for supporting small businesses. We've got sort of 3 central government departments that all sort of fund some sort of business support. We've got regional business support, which in England was funded by local enterprise partnerships, is now funded by over 200 sort of local authorities. So it's really confused, fragmented, and there's no leadership and no strategy, which just translates into being a very confused, complicated landscape for businesses and pretty inefficient use of public funds.
Jane, how did we get here? I mean, what you're painting there is really a damning indictment of the way in which small businesses in this country are being treated with respect to the support they need. And you've quite rightly highlighted the cost of doing business crisis or challenges, and that's putting it in a calm way. I mean, why is it that it's been, how do we get here? Do people just not understand what businesses need? We've got FSB, we've got the chambers. I mean, what are those lobbying groups doing in terms of guiding government policy and overall strategy? So my question is, how do we get here?
I think, there's been quite a bit of effort that has gone into thinking about business support. In policy circles, there have been a number of attempts to sort of simplify business support. Most recent ones have sort of got, I think government's sort of got a bit distracted by other fairly big issues that have come along. But I think really what it really needs is somebody to take, a post, an individual to really take a leadership role of this whole sort of small business agenda. I mean, the changes to funding haven't helped in the sense that, I mean, historically there's always been changes in terms of how business support has been funded, whether it's been funded nationally, regionally, or locally, and we can't seem to make up our mind which is the best way to do that. And so, that's it's moved from one to the other over a period of time, which doesn't really help in terms of sort of creating stability within the system. And I think the most recent changes in terms of the ending of the European structural investment funds and the move to the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, they've been quite difficult as well, because they've created a gap in provision as the European funded programs have closed. There have been delays to the shared prosperity funding programs starting, and then the responsibility for the new programs has been devolved down to, in many cases, quite small local areas. So all of that has sort of just contributed to this sort of fragmentation of the system.
Yes, from my own perspective at Aston Business School in the Midlands, we used to have at least, we ran programs for small businesses, and it was just like one contracting authority, whereas now we're having to respond, and it's an efficient response to local authorities putting out tenders, etc., etc. But Richard, I'm going to come to you now. I repeat the question: how on earth did we get this dire situation whereby business support is again changing rapidly, fragmented, and there is no overall strategy?
So I come from a slightly, I agree with what's been said, but I'll come from a slightly different perspective, because I think it depends on what geographic level you look at. Sure, if you look England-wide, then I think you've got a number of factors that have happened. I think nationally, there's been a distraction because of so many other issues to deal with, and it's something that Jane pointed out there. And when you stand back and look at what's happened over the past decade, that's been a really big issue. I think, secondly, a lot of that micro, small, medium-sized growth is kind of taken for granted. And I think there's also a factor that in the system, I think everybody else thinks somebody else is dealing with it. And I think that's a really big issue that we've got, because you've got the drive for devolution, you've got the regular changes to government departments, and I think it's just slipped off the agenda, and there's no, at what level certain things happen, startup support, growth support, scale support, there's not a plan, and therefore it's not always embedded at each of those levels. So I think what you've ended up with is a situation whereby you've got devolved funds, and devolution as a concept is something I passionately agree with. But from a business support perspective, no framework in which to devolve that funding with a set of priorities that have agreed, and kind of a lack of a national vision for what we want business support to be, what we want the business landscape of the UK to be. I think that's the fundamental challenge: is what do we want to be as a country? What's the big vision? What's the big role that SMEs can play? And if you haven't got that, then at each bit of the system, it kind of gets a bit harder to define. And I agree with all of those things about cash and system breaks in service and all that. But there are some positives about kind of where we are right now, if I can touch on some of those. And I think, with the devolution of funding, it does enable localities that are able to work together to put in place systems that have lasted past the test of time. And you've seen that in a number of localities like Manchester and some of the big combined authority districts that have been able to work together. Not all of them, but some of them have been able to work together and put really solid business support infrastructure in place. And now you could argue that they've got more flexibility with the kind of funds that they've got. We're seeing single pot agreements where you haven't got that same need for match. You've got more flexibility on who you can support and more flexibility in output. So, and arguably more local accountability. So I agree, nationally, there's a big issue that we've got to solve, but there are bits of hope to look at about how it could be done at the local level.
I knew you wanted to play the Manchester card, Richard.
I'm not just playing the Manchester, I'm playing the local card there.
Okay. But look, on a more serious point, what you're really alluding to is the fact that we may be in a better position now because there is no need for match, et cetera, and if that comes on top of an existing stable infrastructure, then there is hope. So let me explore a little bit more about what's been happening in Manchester, because really what you are saying is, look, we've had the opportunity, with the growth company over many years to actually put in place a business support infrastructure which seems to work. So what is it you've been doing that could actually be shared with other combined authorities and other stakeholders in the ecosystem?
Which we are indeed doing. I think if we take the GM example, the Greater Manchester example, and that has been very much applied elsewhere, I think, there was a big exciting vision set out to support businesses. So it was put right at the heart of all of the strategies. There was buy-in from all of the local authorities and the precursor to the combined authority to set up a business growth hub, but to put a lot of emphasis behind that and weight behind it, and to have a place where it focused on those businesses where you could have the greatest impact, focus on those businesses that could make the greatest contribution through growth, make sure there was a fully integrated package that brought together the best of public and private, and that it was well backed, and that it had long-term consistency of that backing that has now got on. And recently the growth hub in Greater Manchester celebrated its 12 years, and a tremendous moment to get to, where you've got that senior political backing from localities, and a really clear view on which companies to work with. And also, and this is something I know is very close to your heart, Mark, is that ongoing learning and just trying to get better and better and better over time, doing the evaluation, seeing what worked, seeing what didn't work, and being able to pivot as situations came along and use resources in a much more flexible way when an emergency happened, or you got COVID, or when we had to respond to some of the challenges that the Brexit brought. Being able to pivot and respond to those issues whilst maintaining a long-term commitment to tackling innovation, tackling others, but bringing the whole ecosystem together. I think there's some big lessons there. And that's what we're now working on, and working with many areas around the country to embed some of those key learning messages.
But growth hubs are sort of a variation in quality, if I can put it that way. I mean, obviously in the West Midlands, we've celebrated 10 years of the growth hub, but later than everywhere else doing it also. But I don't think I would be talking about the success of the growth hub, the Greater Birmingham Solihull Growth Hub, the way you're talking about in Manchester. And I wonder why that is. Is it because, do you think that, it wasn't as embedded in the overall strategy for the region, that perhaps there's other priorities in the West Midlands, but inward investment, about issues to do with, infrastructure. I don't want to go there in this, on this podcast this morning. So why do you think there's this sort of differentiation? Jane, I'm going to ask, when you work across the country as well, so I'll come to you in a moment about the experience of the growth hubs, but my view is that they are very different because of the lack of investment. They weren't all funded by EU, they were some funded by the department, some a mix. And is that part of the reason why there's a bit of
So I think the reason why you perhaps do get some variations is, yes, absolutely, that lack of kind of significant investment in them in some places, but it's more than that. I think where you've got strong public and private collaboration working together with an agreed long-term plan at a scale that works, you can do great things. If you haven't got that in place and you're relying on bits and bobs of funding coming in just to keep the thing on, that can be really challenging. I'd say the one thing is you have got a huge amount of commitment across the country to make these a success, and they are one of the longest lasting business support mechanisms that we've seen for many a year, Mark. But I appreciate that they haven't got the level of funding, but they've got, I think, what you can see in a number of places that have taken it seriously and have invested. Look at what Boost Lancashire's doing at the minute. There's that's been going for coming up to its 10 years. That's been a consistent brand, a consistent bit of positioning. and that just shows you what you can do in a locality, even in very difficult funding constraints. If you set the vision, get parties to it together, you can get there. But I think you haven't always had that same kind of political geographic consistency and over time that you've had in some of the places, and I think that does have an impact on what happens on the ground.
Thanks for that, Richard. I mean, Jen, your experience of working across the piece from Cornwall to Midlands and beyond, and into the Golden Triangle of the Southeast. What's your experience of growth hubs and more widely in terms of business support?
Well, I agree with your earlier comment, Mark, which is that they are hugely variable, and that in part depends on the organisation in which they are embedded. So whether they're in a combined authority, devolved area, or whether they are within a one of the local enterprise partnership areas, or indeed whether they are in the process of moving into a county council. So the infrastructure, if you like, in which they're embedded makes quite a big difference, both to that that sort of vision piece that Richard has talked about, but also quite importantly to the amount of funding that they have, and also to the sort of expertise around an understanding of business support that exists within their host organisation. So, I think the government sort of original vision that every place should have a growth hub, which is the first point of contact that any small business can go to receive at least sort of signposting and connections into the business support ecosystem is a really good idea. I think in practice, it's worked much better in some places than others because of that sort of organisational infrastructure and levels of funding.
I mean, it's all very well to say every place should have a growth hub, but you've got to fund them properly. I know working with the growth hub in Greater Birmingham and Solihull that, it was hand to mouth in terms of grants coming through from Europe as well as from the department. And as a result of all of that, and this is an important point, I think, there's a huge turnover of staff. Not always, but a lot. And therefore, people didn't see a career in business support. They didn't see a career in growth hubs. And I think that's also one of the fundamental failings of business support across the country. We're not actually seeing an opportunity for people to see a career in business support. It seemed to be a filler job as you move on to something else. And I think that attitude's got to change. Richard?
There are some very exciting careers you can have in business support, and there are some wonderful opportunities, but you're absolutely right. If you look at when you're operating on some of the really short contracts that exist at the minute, it's hard to continue to invest and build and create people with that ability to operate in what can be a very challenging environment, because it's not just about providing a direct one-to-one business support, but it's about often being able to implement through that some of the objectives of the funders, which might not be the immediate business requirement, but might be a longer-term objective that you're trying to work through to the mutual benefit, obviously, the company as well, but also have that broader skill set. So it is a really unique role. It is a very special role, but it's one that requires experience. It's one that requires ongoing development and investment. And I think from both the commissioner side and the delivery side, we have seen a bit of an ebbing away. And dare I say, since the days of the regional development agencies, I think we've had a decade where we have been able to benefit from that really big investment that created a great cohort of really well-informed specifiers, policy people, that then also created a big body of people who are able to deliver stuff. We've had 10 years of that, but we had 10 years where, whilst we've benefited from it, we haven't been able to invest in it in quite the same way. And I'm talking here about at a countrywide level. And I think we are seeing the fallout of that right now. And the recent shift from ERDF to UKSBF definitely showed some challenges in some places.
I mean, you dared mention the RDAs, dare I mention the Small Business Service as a national strategy across England, and underneath all of that, dare I mention business links, and dare I mention the investment that went in. And I think the point I'm trying to make is, never mind the politics of all of that, was that it did create a cadre of people who saw it as their professional development, as business mentors, business support, and those people were available as the system was changing. But I'm wondering where that future, they've all moved on to different things. Jane, I knew you want to come in on this, please.
Well, I guess the thing I really wanted to add and build on what Richard and you have already said is that, I mean, really what we want in every place, however that is defined, is really good functioning ecosystem for small businesses. So that, that can mean physical space for their workshops, manufacturing facilities. It can mean advice. It can mean, access to finance to invest in things, access to skills and knowledge. But that sort of ecosystem is only really built up if you've got stability there, because it's built on relationships between people and organizations. And so, one of the business advisors and other people involved in business support, they're an important part in connecting up the players in that system. And if you don't have stability in that, and the roles of organizations are changing, or advisors are, leaving this world to go off and find other jobs elsewhere, it just makes it more difficult to build those connections and have a really well-forming ecosystem that brings together both the private and the public sector.
Yeah, points well made. Richard, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long, long time to build up that effective ecosystem, and you get really big impacts when it happens, because you get, somebody gets turned down for finance, but that person knows exactly where to send them for the right kind of finance. You just get the system starts to support itself. It takes a while to build up, but you need those people at the centre just to give you along, make it work and bring it together. If that changes, then it's very easy to dismantle, very hard to build. And I think you just need that long-term commitment to do that, which is very, very hard in the current environment in some places.
I mean, we have one national programme at the moment across the UK, which is Help to Grow Management, which again it's there as a national programme, and I think it demonstrates perhaps that the government does realise that this is important. But I guess the argument is, well, there's hundreds of thousands of other small businesses that need that type of support, and can only deal with so many tens of thousands eventually. But so, any thoughts on the fact that in 2021 that was launched as a national programme? Is that helpful? Is that something to build on locally, Richard?
Yeah, happy to jump in on that. I think, look, the role of business schools has, it's great to see that galvanised through that mechanism. I think there's been a lot of positive feedback from businesses who have been through that process and have been able to really invest that time and effort. Those that are in the right spot to do that, they've got a lot from it. But my fear is that that's seen as a single solution to all the problems and challenges and opportunities. And you can't just have one solution. Not every business is in the right place to go, do you know what? Yeah, I'm up for signing up for spending the next 10 weeks with Mark, or I'm up for really, really getting behind a whole range of change within my business in one go. Just not everybody has that capacity to do that. There are many that do, and it's brilliant for them, but it's got to be part of a broader range, a smorgasbord, a toolbox. It's one of the tools in the toolbox, but you need a range of tools. When you're sitting down in front of a business, you've got to work out what they need at that time and have a range of solutions. And just having one big chunky solution isn't always the best thing for the individual business. It might be, and when it is, it's fantastic. But I think you need a much broader. You need to be able to bring in maybe just a single mentoring solution. You may be able to need to bring. It might be about access to finance at the time. It might be they particularly have got a challenge around innovation, but to give them that full course isn't always the right solution for them.
I think you're right, Richard. It is part of the overall offer, and I think that, working at Aston as I do, and I work with hundreds of businesses now coming through that program. We point them and connect them on, because Aston Centre for Growth is well connected into the ecosystem in the Midlands. So we connect them to the Growth Hub, and us businesses. We tell them, okay, where can they go from here on in for finance, for support in terms of skills, etc., etc. Jane, any thoughts on Help to Grow management?
Well, I guess building on Richard's comment. I mean, we've talked a lot about small businesses because we think that message isn't really getting through, But I think we all know that there isn't a single small business. The term small business covers a really wide variety of businesses, from micro businesses to scale ups, and everything in between. So I think it's absolutely right to say that there are really quite a range of different types of businesses that have different types of needs, and therefore the type of support that needs to be available needs to meet that range of needs. There are a couple of other national business support programs as well. Programs around export, around innovating, and I guess what's interesting to my mind is that I think there is a rationale for having some programs which are delivered nationally, some that are delivered regionally, and perhaps some that are delivered locally. But I don't think at the moment in policy thinking is that sort of analysis that goes on to say, this is the problem, this is the type of solution that's required, and that is a type of solution that is best delivered either nationally, regionally, or locally. Seems a little bit haphazard to me in terms of how things are. And what we see as a result of that is some quite small places are trying to commission programs which are really difficult to deliver on quite a small scale, because they're quite specialist and quite technical, and they would be much better delivered on a bigger geography. And then there are some bits of sort of national support where you might argue they might be better delivered very, very locally. So I think that whole what is the right scale of delivery is missing from the debate and the thinking at the moment.
That's an interesting point, Jane. I mean, I mentioned Help to Grow management, not necessarily about the program itself, but the role of business schools. I mean, the Small Business Charter was launched in 2014 to address the fact that, look, business schools are there for the long term, going back to the earlier discussion, hopefully. They may have some financial difficulties, but essentially they're there. But it's a question of business owners do not think that going to a business school is the most obvious thing to do if they're looking for support. But it's about how the business schools are involved in their local community. That's part of the accreditation process from getting small business charter status. But look, we're coming to the end of our time. I really wanted to sort of throw into 2024. And if you were to be really preparing the manifesto for small businesses, for whatever party, what would be your top three asks?
So I think the main things is to demonstrate actually by engaging with the small, medium-sized businesses, you can achieve some of your really big policy objectives. And I think that sometimes gets missed. So let's pick out net zero as the first example. There's a big drive to achieve net zero. Now, I know we've had some slight changes to the emphasis with the current government, but there's still that long-term commitment to achieve net zero. But you're only going to do that if you get the SME community on board with a full integrated plan and enable them to get there and play their really, really critical role in achieving that net zero target. And so, and the notion that you can do it through a bit of nudge and a bit of, you need to help. They need help. This is a complex question. When you come and look at your business, what's my net zero? What's my impact now? What could it be in the future? How do I get there? And there's tried and tested mechanisms to do it, but it just needs scaling up. That's the number one thing that I would say. I think the second big thing is around that continued adoption, digital technology. It's such a fundamental part of business support, and it can have a really big impact on productivity. There's many other things that can as well, but getting data and digital technology right at the heart of that is key. We're passionate about data. We've recently launched our Growth Flag tool, which is all about finding those companies who've got the greatest potential for growth. So I think, we're adopting digital technology ourselves and embedding that. And then the third thing I'd say is that whole recruitment, retaining and retraining of staff, and that workforce planning is really key. And look, we've only just begun to see the impact of AI on what it means for workforces, but all the indications are people are going to have to retrain throughout their careers. And I think getting workforce development right at the heart of business support. So there's three big policy themes, helping people, making sure we're tackling on the productivity through digital technology, and achieving net zero. Three big things where business support can have a really big positive role to play.
I think you should be writing your own manifesto, Richard. Good points, excellent points, and I think that ties in very well with the research that the Enterprise Research Centre has been doing in recent years as well about the move towards net zero, et cetera, and digital adoption. Jane, writing your manifesto, what would it be? What would your big asks be?
Well, I guess I've been thinking quite a lot about this sort of organisational, institutional stability, because I think the stability is a key part of getting this right. So I guess I would be hoping for government to set up some organisational structure that there's an individual, a department, an institute, I don't know what it is, that takes the lead on small businesses and is responsible for making sure that they get the sort of support that they need. I would encourage that institute or whatever it is to really engage with the evidence, and in particular the work done by the Enterprise Research Centre. You'll be pleased to hear, Mark.
Thank you.
Make sure that policy is is really well founded. And then I think the third thing is to recognise that the policy will be implemented across a range of organisation stakeholders, and to make sure that those organisations have the expertise and understanding of business support, so that they have the capacity to really help design, deliver an effective business support ecosystem.
Okay, thanks, Jen. I was going to jump in and say, you mean you're putting in a call for the Small Business Administration?
Well, I think that's certainly one model that's worth taking a look at.
Much talked about, little understood, and perhaps not applied in the UK context very well in terms of how it might fit. But Richard, you really want to comment on that, I can see.
Yeah, I think the big thing that we've got now that we haven't necessarily had as much in the past is some of the data tools, system that and the understanding of what works. We're at a position now where, through the work that the ERC and others have done, but the ERC in particular have really brought together an incredible body of evidence to say, this is what works, this is how you can tackle some of these big challenges and opportunities. We've then got a whole raft of new data sets and new ways of playing with that data that enable us to find those companies to work with, those who've got the greatest potential for growth. And we've then got the systems that can really take people through a journey in a really well-planned way to help them tackle those challenges, and know and measure that they're tackling those challenges along the way through benchmarking and a whole range of other tools. So I think we've got a lot of the ingredients here right now to make those changes. And the other thing is, what we're talking about in terms of level of investment in business support, this isn't, we're not talking the NHS here. We're talking something that needs to be much better funded than it is now, but the rewards are immense. A recent programme that we've just done, £47 million investment, £500 million net impact on the local economy. This stuff pays for itself, and I think is a really clear, direct view that it pays for itself. So I think we've got a lot of the mechanisms. We just need to take it seriously and make conscious decisions about what we're doing for the longer term. And I think, that national, regional, local is a really key point, that we need to be really conscious when we're making those decisions, and that we're conscious about how those three interplay with each other.
Well, I think this government has just found £36 billion down the back of a sofa, given recent announcements in part of the country, Richard. So maybe if they invested that in what we have been talking about, it would pay for itself and some. And
Absolutely.
then they might be able to afford HST. Anyway, let's not go there. We're done. We're out of time.
We should go there, though. We should, because that's exactly what we should do.
Well, not on this podcast, Richard, is what I mean. I think in terms of no, sorry, I'm not going to make any political comments on I think it's interesting times in terms of changes in terms of policy commitments. I mean, I think this is the problem as well, I guess, in terms of long-term commitments to big infrastructure projects. We need to be serious about this, and it's difficult. Anyway, lots of issues. This will come back as we move towards an election and beyond, because business support has been something all three of us have been involved in for many, many years. Jane, Richard, thanks so much for a great conversation today. Thoroughly enjoyed that. And thank you too for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it and are interested in finding out more about the ERC's work, which Richard and Jane have been referring to, please visit our website, www.enterpriseresearch.ac.uk. Thank you very much indeed, and we'll join you next time.